Well, it's a privilege to be with you all this morning, and I just want to ask you guys a question. And I want to let you know up front, the students are incredible. Our students in youth ministry are incredible. When I get to speak to them, they respond really, really well. And so we have a little bit of a conversation. So I just want to warn you, most of my questions are not rhetorical. I would love it if you guys would respond to me, and there are no dumb answers, right? That's what we always hear. We don't believe it, but we hear that. But really, just I trust you to respond. And so I want to ask you guys a question. You know what's better than worshiping once on a Sunday? Twice would be a good one. How about 3 times? I got to do that this morning. How cool is that? And I get to do that because normally I'm in with the students during this time, but Pastor Tom and his family are away on a vacation, which is much deserved. And so I get to be with you all 3 times, which is awesome. But here in this specifically 11 o'clock service, I want to tell you something about myself. We're dealing with Joseph, and he's in his pit, right? We know about this pit that he finds himself in. And I want to tell you, I identify with Joseph in this way with the pit. Although it may not be what you expect. I found myself in a specific series of pits when I was young because I love digging things. Anyone ever like digging? Yeah. When you're a kid, that's like the most fun thing you can think of doing sometimes. So I was digging pits, and my dad came home one time to find an incredible pit I had dug, and I was actually, for real, up to my chin in it. Okay? And it was such a good pit that it was actually starting to gather water at the bottom. It was coming up through the bottom. I was so proud of myself. I had dug for hours and hours and hours, and I placed it perfectly right inside the gate of the back fence. So as soon as you walked in, you could just get in the pit if you'd like to. And my dad was less than impressed with this pit, even though I was so proud of myself. And it continued the series of pits. Actually, my sisters, there's 4 of them and one of me. We actually decided, since we didn't have a pool and it was really hot in South Florida, we were going to make another pit. And this one would be large enough for us to sit down in it and fit an 8-foot tarp in it. So you can imagine my dad's surprise and lack of joy at this pit that we dug. I'd love to say that happened once, but it happened all the time. Probably one of my best ideas, or so I thought at that point, was I decided to, and this is probably marketable, I decided to make an outdoor ant farm out of a pit. Okay? So what I did is I saw a friend who had an ant farm, and I was jealous, and so I decided, you know what, I'll do one better. I'll make an outdoor ant farm. It'll be huge. And I'll take the ants' work, all the work that they've done, and I'll make it better by adding things to their environment, and they'll appreciate it. And so I started digging this massive pit right next to this big anthill I knew was there, and I could actually get down in, and I could take out the side of their tunnel that they'd worked really hard to build, and I could see them moving around. It was really, really cool. These were South Florida fire ants, and they didn't think it was that cool that I destroyed their anthill to make an outdoor ant farm. Maybe the coolest pit I dug, and I said that about all of them because I think they're all awesome, is have you guys seen Swiss Family Robinson? You ever seen that? You know the part where they try to capture the tiger? And they dig that big pit? They cover it with bamboo and they put leaves on top? Yeah. Like I said, I had 4 sisters. And I would go around my backyard digging pits. And I would fill them with things like sticker burrs, if you guys know what those are. They hurt really bad, they make you bleed. And sometimes sharpened sticks, and then I would cover them with sticks, and I would camouflage them with leaves and dirt. And then I would say, hey, who wants to play tag? And as I'm running around my backyard, I'm trying to remember the location of all my own pits so I don't fall in them. Truth be told, most of the time my conscience would get to me, right? I'd be right there, I'd be like, oh, this is going to be so awesome. Oh man, this is a terrible idea, they're going to get hurt, mom's going to hate me. All right, let's stop playing tag. Sometimes I would take the sharp stuff out and they would fall, but like worst case scenario, like a twisted ankle, no big deal. I loved those pits. I loved them. It was a blast. And we've been talking about Joseph's pits, and we all know that his pits weren't quite as fun as mine, and they weren't quite as juvenile. They were actually pretty serious stuff, right? And so we've been talking about how Joseph found himself in a pit, and then he found himself enslaved, and he found himself in prison, and things got worse and worse and worse for Joseph. And we talked about how, Joseph, because of how he responds in this process, with all the integrity and with all the good decisions he makes, it almost feels like I can't identify with Joseph, really, for real. Because Joseph seems kind of superhuman. How can someone be that good? And he fits into this long line of epic heroes who do these incredible things, and they experience worldwide disaster that they survive, and They slay giants and they win battles and they do all these heroic things, and we are just kind of ordinary folks. And so we had the flannel graph up here the couple weeks, and we decided, we learned this kind of storytelling that made these epic heroes seem so otherworldly. The issue is, once we actually zoom in on these people's lives, there are some things that didn't make it to the flannel graph, right? They're the parts of the Bible where you get to and you're like, am I allowed to read this? Did they know it's in here? It's like when you look at these people's lives, really you zoom in, there's some messed up stuff in their lives. In fact, some of these heroes, their lives make yours and mine look actually kind of neat and tidy. And yet they're people that we look at and we say, man, they're incredible. They're incredible. So we've been kind of warning ourselves again and again. Remember, these are ordinary people with ordinary life decisions to make. We've said it this way. We use this quote G.K. Chesterton gave us, and he says, the most extraordinary thing in the world is an ordinary man, an ordinary woman, and their ordinary children. And we've kind of batted this around, like, can this really be true? If we don't find ourselves on flannel graph and we're just ordinary people, can that actually be extraordinary? Can that actually be an incredible life to live? And so today we're going to finish out our focus on Joseph, and hopefully we get to wrap up some loose ends with him and with our story and how it relates to his. And if you remember, Joseph finds himself in prison, and he has these opportunities to interpret dreams, and he finally gets a chance to interpret Pharaoh's dream, the number one, the head honcho guy in Egypt. He interprets his dreams, and he's very clear to say, it's not me who's going to do this, it's God who's going to do this. God's going to give you an answer, and God predicts through Joseph a 7-year famine. 7-year famine. And while he's sitting there, Joseph decides, hey, I've got some ideas. I'm going to give a proposal. He submits this proposal to Pharaoh and says, hey, for these 7 years, here's how I think we can avoid some of the hardship that's coming our way. Pharaoh likes it so much that he actually says, Joseph, you're the guy that should lead us into that way. And he gets this instant promotion. And he gets a promotion to second in command in all of Egypt. And it's strange. I mean, at this point in time, he's finally made it out of the pit and out of prison. But up until this point, if you're like me, you've been kind of frustrated. Like, why, when Joseph was so good for so long, did it take so long for people to recognize it? Why, when he was a man of integrity again and again and again, why, when he chose well with Potiphar's wife and chose well to have faith in prison, why did he continue to honor God and yet get punished anyways? And I wonder if an ordinary guy like him, and like you and like me, was ever tempted to give up and to just feel like, man, I'm forgotten in this place. God must have stopped paying attention. It's almost like Joseph was experiencing only the bad half of karma. Like maybe karma didn't work, just the bad side. And part of me just kind of wanted Joseph to give up. Anybody else feel like that? Like, enough's enough, Joseph. Just be done. And yet, as we know, Joseph didn't give up. He never did. He actually stuck to God no matter what the circumstance was. And there's this really cool word picture here that Pastor Tom told us about. He said the reality was that it wasn't Joseph just sticking to God. In fact, the Bible's clear. God was sticking to Joseph the whole time. In fact, the Bible says again and again and again, the Lord was with Joseph. With his brothers, the Lord was with Joseph. In the pit, the Lord was with Joseph. In Potiphar's house, the Lord was with Joseph. In prison, the Lord was with Joseph. And the word picture here Tom showed us was this, all right? It's that God was with Joseph, and he actually allowed Joseph to lean on him. And as I started thinking about leaning, I started thinking about the incredible opportunity we had to do a sing-along here. And for everyone to just grab a shoulder and stand up and sing that song we all know, right? You guys want to do that? No, me neither. That's creepy. We're not going to do that. But the word picture here, this lean on me idea, this incredible kumbaya thing, isn't just that. It's not a platitude. It's not just this interesting cliche we have. Joseph seemed to take it really seriously. And he seemed to actually bank his life on it, no matter where he was. And it begs this question of us. If Joseph's ordinary, and we're ordinary, and God was with Joseph, and he could lean on him, no matter where he went, can you and I actually do the same? Like for real. Not just read the Bible and say, that sounds really great, I'll try it. But for real, could we do that? If we find ourselves in a pit of despair, loneliness, brokenness, rejection, can we do that? If we find ourselves forgotten or wounded, if we find ourselves with a bill collector calling, if we find ourselves with a diagnosis we can't handle, if we find ourselves in an addiction or a disappointment or broken relationships, is that something that actually might work for us? We talked about Joseph's faith this way. Joseph deeply believes that God is who he said he is, and that's the truth that he's sticking to. And that God will do everything he's promised to do. That was his confidence. And in that, Joseph shows us how to lean on God in any circumstance. All right, so Joseph's promoted. The famine that he predicted is actually taking place. And actually, of the 7-year famine, he's actually about 2 years in at this point when we find him again. And he's promoted. He's got a company chariot. He's got a company card. He's got a ring that gives him the power to like stamp anything and say, this is Pharaoh's will. He actually has people that go out in front of him when he's on his chariot and just tell people to get out of the way. Like, he's that important. People come and just say, hey, Joseph's coming, get out of the way, you're worthless. Like, clear the road. This is how much power Joseph has. And Joseph gets a pay package, and it's really interesting, and it's messed up at the same time. Remember when Joseph was sold as property? After all this time, part of Joseph's pay package is a person. Really weird, right? Not a good thing. But this is how far he's come. He's gone from property of someone else to owning people. That's how far Joseph is from his pit. But I can't imagine he's forgotten all that way, right? And it makes me wonder, what does an ordinary person do when they've been beat up their whole lives and all of a sudden they're in power? What does an ordinary person like you and I do when they get to do what they want to do for real? If you're like me, there's this temptation to keep a list of people who have wronged you. Anybody? You don't have to raise your hand, but you have a list of people that have kind of messed with you in the past. I wonder if Joseph wasn't tempted to say, hey, okay, now that I'm in power, good. The family's, okay, we're doing okay, good. I'm going to take some personal time for the next few weeks. And I'm going to go and I'm going to track down the jailer, because I'm sure he wasn't that nice. And I'm going to track down the cupbearer, because remember, he forgot about Joseph after Joseph saved his life. He literally just forgot he existed for a couple years. And then I'm going to track down Potiphar's wife, right? The crazy one, because she's the reason I ended up in prison. And then I know Potiphar was kind of okay to me, but he didn't believe me when I told him the truth. He thought his wife was telling the truth, even though she's insane. So I'm gonna track him down. And I'm about 250 miles away from home. And I imagine my brothers are probably still jerks. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go find them too. I just wonder. I wonder if Joseph, as an ordinary guy, if he wasn't tempted to just start righting all the wrongs in his own way. This crazy thing of having all this power, it brings Joseph to a strange place, because this famine was going on. He's 2 years in, and before too long, this entire region, not just Egypt itself, but the entire region around him is actually engulfed in famine. And it just so happens that everybody within a huge swath on this area was struggling. Crops were dying. Just imagine as people trying to provide for your family, and nothing you do happens and it doesn't work. And it reaches so far that it actually gets to this spot called Canaan, which is where his brothers were. And so his brothers end up coming along with a lot of other people into Egypt, 250-mile journey. And they find themselves before Joseph. I want you to keep this in mind, though. They don't know who Joseph is. They don't know he's alive even. Because if you sell someone into slavery, especially to Egypt, chances are they're not going to last very long. So they find themselves in front of Joseph, not knowing it's him, and this is what happens first. It's insane. Chapter 42, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Weird. That almost sounds familiar, right? Joseph's brothers, not knowing that Joseph is who he is, come and bow themselves down to who they just think is the guy they need to bow to get food. But Joseph, I'm sure, has not lost this situation. See, the dream that he had that many years ago just came true. The one that got him in trouble in the first place just took place. And they bow to this guy that they just think he's a CEO. We're your slaves, we need some food. And again, I wonder, what does an ordinary person do when they have all the power? See, I would guess you'd want to mess with people. And the cool thing about the Bible is it records not just Joseph's really good things, it also records Joseph's kind of like shady stuff. And I don't know this. Some people think he was testing his brothers to see how good they were again, to see if they were still jerks. I wonder if he wasn't just messing with them. Follow me here. When Joseph saw his brothers, this is in chapter 42, he recognized them, but remember, they didn't recognize him. But he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. like he doesn't know, right? And then he continues, and I think he maybe wants them to squirm a little bit. He actually accuses them of being spies. These hungry guys who just came to get food, he's like, no, you're spies. You want to see what's going on in Egypt? You want to take these details back? And then he does something fun. He actually puts them all in prison for 3 years, or 3 days together. Not 3 years. The Bible says in verse 17, it says he put them all together in prison for 3 days to think about what they had done. That was my part. This testing or these pranks, it goes on for a while. In fact, it gets really, really strange, I'm sure, for the brothers who have to start wondering what's happening here. Why won't this guy just give us food? Because Joseph actually gives them food and he says, okay, you need to take this food back to your family. I get that. I'm going to give you this much, and I'm sure you'll need more. And if you need more, here's what I need. I need you to bring back your baby brother. Okay? Baby brother's name is Benjamin. And after Joseph was dead to his dad kind of adopted Benjamin as his favorite son. And so this guy, Joseph's place was taken by Benjamin. And I wonder how the brothers felt when they were like, wow, okay, Dad, we've got some good news and some bad news. Good news is there's plenty of food in Egypt, and we can get more. Bad news is we're going to need your favorite son again. Right? I know we don't have a great track record, but this is what it's going to take. And I wonder what Joseph was feeling in that moment. Apparently, the situation works out for Joseph because his dad says, yes, we need food badly, so yes, take Benjamin, but be careful. And he actually says, if you were to be lost, I would die. So Joseph's brothers bring Benjamin back and bow before him again and ask for food, and Joseph gives it to him and sends them back home with the instructions to bring their dad this time. And his last prank that he pulls is he takes this silver cup, a special silver cup, and he puts it in Benjamin's bag, and no one knows it. And so as they leave and they're on their way back home to get Dad, he sends his officials after them and says, hey, when you catch them, look in the bag and find the cup and make a big deal about it. And so they do that, and of course Benjamin doesn't know what's coming, his brothers don't know what's happening, and everyone's really afraid right now. And Joseph says, well, I guess there's only one thing I can do. That's enslave the youngest brother who took my cup. And the brothers respond, as you would imagine, out of total fear. And one of the brothers actually says, listen, this will kill my father. Don't take Benjamin. Let me take his place. And whether it was all a prank or whether it was a test, and Joseph apparently found what he wanted to find in his brothers. And what happens next is this incredibly profound view into Joseph's heart. This ordinary guy. Genesis 45 says, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. They still don't know it's him. And he wept so loudly that all the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Why were they terrified? Because ordinary people keep lists. And ordinary people do things like take revenge. And ordinary people don't forget that they were hurt. And Joseph says to his brothers, come close to me. And I imagine his brothers all at once saying, no, thank you. We're good here. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Oh, that one. Oh no. He continues, and now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there'll be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you that sent me here, but God. I imagine one of the brothers, as they look around at each other, just saying, no, Joseph, for sure, it was us. I mean, we were there. In fact, I'm still wearing the watch that I bought with the money I got from selling you. How can you say God brought you to this place? We sold you. We put you in the pit, left you to die, decided to make a buck off you instead. How can you say that was God? Does he do things like that? Joseph continues, he made me father or lord to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord over all Egypt. Come down to me and don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. Really, Joseph? After all they did to you, after all you went through, it's that easy? See, it's moments like this that we're tempted to think Joseph wasn't like us. Because how do you forgive on that level? How do you view your life in such a way that you can see bad things as things that God actually wanted to happen and that he loves you still and he has a plan for you? So much forgiveness that you actually allow your brothers to come live with you? That makes no sense. Well, Pharaoh, as you heard, he catches wind of this, and because of Joseph shows his family generosity, he actually invites them to live in an incredibly fertile land. We fast forward a little bit, and Joseph's father is getting up in years, and he's seen his son. In fact, when he sees his son, Joseph, for the first time, he says, I can die now. And so with that incredible reconciliation, reunion, his father begins to let go a little bit, and he passes. And there's this really awkward moment. Because if you and I look at the situation, we know it's not all settled, right? And the brothers think the same thing. They actually say this in Genesis 50. They say, when Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did to him? What if now that dad's gone, Joseph realizes what we really did to him? What if now that dad's gone, he doesn't worry so much about what people think? So they went to Joseph saying, I need you to pause here for a second because I think the brothers are pretty afraid. And I think about times when I was afraid to say something to someone, and I think back to my middle school days. What did you guys do when you wanted to ask somebody something in middle school but you were afraid? What's that? Wrote a note, right? So I wonder if the message to Joseph went a little bit like this. Dear Joseph, are you going to kill us? Please check yes or no. And so they send this letter ahead, I assume, I can only assume, I guess, that they send this little note to Joseph, and actually it was strange. They seemed like such incompetent people, maybe, I don't know, that their dad had to script it for them. The Bible tells us, it lets us in on their little secret. It says, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. Handed it to you right there. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. Again, check out Joseph's response here. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. Ordinary guy, ordinary emotions, ordinary tears. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him, starting to become a pattern, right? We are your slaves, they said. This bowing thing, it's now the way his brothers communicate with him. This is how we start every conversation now, I guess. You guys bow down to me, and I get to choose what to do with you. Here's what ordinary Joseph says back. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. He did what? What does he mean? Don't be afraid, I'm not God. You had your own plan, and it was evil. And you executed it, and it didn't work. Because God had a plan, and he wasn't done. All this messed up stuff that happened, God actually found a way to use it for good. And not just for my good, but for your good and for the saving of many lives. Do you hear it in the way he responds? After all this stuff that had happened to Joseph, here he was, just like this. No longer in the pit, he's now in the palace with everything he could ever want, and he's leaning on God. Still. And you know what amazes me about this story? It's not that he finds himself in a pit, because we've talked about it already. If we went around with a microphone, we could all talk about our pits, right? We've all been there. Ordinary people find themselves in pits. And it's not even so much that he gets out of the pit, because we're good Americans, right? We've been told all our lives by our coaches and our teachers and our parents, if you work hard enough, if you apply yourself, pick yourself up by the bootstraps, you'll get out of stuff. Life will turn around. We see that all the time, right? His integrity, Joseph's integrity is amazing. It really is. It's incredible and it inspires me. But if you think hard enough, you can probably think of someone in your life who has integrity. They make good decisions. They have that kind of character, right? So it's impressive, but it's not amazing. It's incredible that his dream comes true. I mean, that seems a little bit unexplainable. It's a miracle. Like he has this dream way back when and it comes true. That's incredible, but it still isn't what amazes me most. What amazes me most about Joseph's story is that God accomplishes his will through Joseph, but also in Joseph. See, all my life I thought that this story was all about Joseph, and it was all about integrity. So when I looked at the flannel graph and people told me this story, guess who the hero was? Joseph, yeah. And guess what I need to do as an ordinary person to be like Joseph? I need to have that kind of integrity, flannel graph integrity, so I can be the hero. And my greatest desire when I hear that story is that I can be a good little boy who God will use like a carpenter uses a saw to just get a job done, right? But that's not this story at all. The hero of this story was never Joseph. And the moral of this story was never integrity, although that matters. The hero of this story is God. God's the one who showed up again and again and again. God's the one that allowed Joseph to trust him and not fear. God's the one that empowered Joseph to have integrity. God's the one that didn't just see fit to use him as an instrument of his will, but also to be so present, so close, so loving, so merciful, that he would work on Joseph from the inside out. This ordinary person. Here's what it looks like to me. Yes, God saved many lives. I mean, incredibly saved so many lives in that region. But he also saved Joseph's. And he went beyond that. In fact, he not only saved Joseph's life, he actually gave Joseph's life meaning and purpose when it was lost. He showed Joseph that time wasted was redeemable. He showed Joseph that he was never forgotten no matter where he went. God showed Joseph that no relationship is past reconciliation in his power. God showed up again and again and again. Most amazing in this was that God actually changed Joseph's heart. Joseph's choice to trust God in the pit allowed him to act out God's mercy and will in the palace. His heart was changed. Joseph was changed. We've said this a couple different times. We've warned you and warned me and warned ourselves about how we should not see Joseph. And so I want to do it again as we close down Joseph's story. I want to warn you not to see Joseph as superhuman. I don't want to go there this morning for one really, really big reason. If you're like me and you see Joseph and you see him as superhuman, you all of a sudden believe that I can never be like him. Isn't that right? Joseph's so awesome, he's so good, he has such integrity, I can never be like him. And you know what subtly that actually is? That's me subtly saying, since I can never be like Joseph, I don't have to be like Joseph. Since I can never be like Joseph, I give myself permission not to act like him in my decision-making or my faith. When I make him something other than what I could ever be, I allow myself to be what I feel like. So I don't want to pretend like Joseph is magic. Joseph had a series of really ridiculously difficult decisions to make. And you can see how ordinary he is in the midst of it with his tears. I wonder how long he had been holding those tears back when he saw his brothers and his dad. And you can see how ordinary he is when he tests his brothers out of mistrust. And I wonder, I don't know the answer, but I wonder what would have happened if Joseph would have been just a little bit lazy and not chosen well, or a little bit unforgiving, or maybe a little bit fearful. And he didn't really trust that God was someone he could lean on, and he made a decision that was less than. You see, if I find it hard to relate to Joseph, if you find it hard to relate to Joseph, it's probably because we can't imagine making that many good decisions in a row. It's probably because we can't imagine trusting God enough to actually put our faith in him like that. See, the miracle is not what Joseph did. It's that you and I can live that kind of life too. And what's awesome is not Joseph. The good news is not Joseph. The good news is that God is faithful. So we don't have to fear anything. We can make difficult decisions in the pit because God has an extraordinary ability to tie up every loose end in our lives. Even the loose ends you have no idea exist. Even the loose ends that someone did something evil to you. Even the loose ends that you think can never be reconciled. God can tie them up. And somehow in God's mercy, he can take terrible things, bad things, and turn them into good, even the saving of many lives. And so I want to ask you this morning a question you've been asked multiple times this series. And I want you to try to forget that everyone else is here for a moment. I want you to ask yourself, is this really possible for me? That I can trust God? What's your pit? What's the addiction or the habit that you find yourself enslaved to? What's the fear that guards you from doing what you know you should do? What is it in your life that makes you wonder if God has forgotten about you or his plan is done for you? What's that relationship in your life that you feel like is absolutely impossible to reconcile? What if God wants to work through that very stuff? Not around it, not below it, not outside it. What if he wants to work directly through that stuff for the saving of many lives, but also for the saving of yours and the healing of yours and the purpose of your life? What if he wants to bless you like that, like he did with Joseph? It's clear from Joseph's life that the biggest thing we have in common with him is two decisions on the table. And because he's ordinary, we know this feeling already because we're ordinary too. We have two decisions on the table every time, in every instance, in every circumstance. Do I really ultimately trust that God is who he says he is and that he will fulfill his promise like he's promised to do? Or am I going to allow myself to find my own path, come what may? That's our decision. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you so much for this morning. I thank you for this incredible body of believers. I thank you for this awesome story that you've shown us. God, I thank you that your message is clear, that we're not alone and that we can lean on you. God, I thank you for the opportunities you give us to see you working in our lives, to see that you're faithful, to see that you're strong, that you're powerful, that your will is not over, And God, we all know there are points we can point to where there has been redemption in our lives, and we're hungry for more, God. We don't want to become people that trust ourselves more than you. We don't want to become people who forget how good you've been. God, we ask for your continued mercy in our lives, that you would show us where it is that we need to honor you without fear. God, would you show us, would you highlight to us the people around us that you would have us communicate with and love on? God, we want to see you work. We want to see the saving of many lives here. And we ask that you would not just use us to accomplish it, but that you would work through us and in us so our hearts can be shaped like yours. We love you. We trust you this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.